We're diving already into week number 3 in Major League Soccer, joined by Jake Zivin, the voice of the Portland Timbers. And of course, you've probably heard his call on some national outlets as well over the years, and will certainly continue to do so. One of the great voices already in Major League Soccer. It pains me to say he's a few years younger than I am. But what a fun career it has been to monitor. We'll dive into the Timbers coming up as, interestingly enough, the final road trip for Austin last year is the first road trip for Austin this year. But Jake, how are you doing?
I'm good. For us, right? Like I always am eager for the off season to get over. I like a little bit of it to begin, and then I just want games to come back. And when you get into preseason, it's like, all right, like let's make it count. Let's get back into the stadiums that are full. And so what we love to do is to broadcast the sport and to do it in these wonderful atmospheres that both of us are so lucky to be able to call games in. So man, doing great and enjoying the first couple of weeks of the season.
Well, you got your wish, the shortest offseason in MLS history. I think that ultimately, though, we're going to have to pay for it next offseason when season wraps up earlier and the next season starts probably a little bit more standard of time. Yeah. Well, Jake, you can't get away from Austin, Texas. That I looked at your Instagram the other night, and your very first post was a certain Austin, Texas-based football team playing a certain Oregon-based football team in the Alamo Bowl back in 2013. Right. That was a 30-7 stomping the Ducks over the Longhorns. That was Mac Brown's last game as head coach of Texas. Yes. And ultimately, you got the better of that exchange.
Yeah, man, that was in my previous kind of not career, but previous job as the sports anchor for the ABC station in Eugene and covering the Ducks. I timed it out great. I was there for my first season was when they lost to Auburn in the national title game. And literally my last day on the job was them losing to Ohio State in the national championship game before I moved up to Portland to be full-time with the Timbers. But I was there for that Chip Kelly, Michael James, Marcus Mariota era of Oregon football. That was so much fun to be around and so much fun to cover. That Alamo Bowl, yeah, look, that Oregon team was better than an Alamo Bowl team that year with Marcus leading them, and that was a tough one for Texas. Tough in Mac's final game, right, to have to go out like that. But we had a great time in San Antonio. I think like that was when I probably just joined Instagram and I didn't really know how to use it, and so I was like, yeah, I kind of used it like I probably should have used Twitter, right? Like posting a video of the team coming out of the field. Instagram is, as you've seen since then on my Instagram, is far more personal and far less professional, whereas Twitter is more keeping it with the professional stuff.
Yeah, I'm still figuring out how to use Instagram. I'll get there eventually. But it's a reminder of how quickly you've become synonymous with that region in the Pacific Northwest, even though you yourself are a Chicago area guy. In fact, I think I saw you were 12 when the Fire got started up and a young Josh Wolf was making his debut. Any memories from those times?
Oh man, I mean, I was a diehard Chicago Fire fan. I grew up playing soccer. It was my favorite sport. It was the sport I was best at, which is saying nothing because I was terrible at all sports, but I was slightly better at soccer, at least comparatively to everything else. So for me, the Fire were on the same level as the Cubs and the Bears and the Bulls. They were our hometown team in my favorite sport. I was bummed when Chicago didn't get an expansion team in 96. I would have been 10 when the league started, as disappointed as a 10-year-old can be over something like that. And I remember just being thrilled with me and my friends when the announcement was made that Chicago was getting a team. And I remember this so vividly. We were sitting in the lunchroom. It was probably 5th grade. And we were drawing out what we thought the logo would be for the Chicago Rhythm, because that was the rumored name. And I don't know, in retrospect, it's like, I don't know how we even heard that, how we even came up with that. And then at like the 20th year anniversary of MLS, there were all these stories of kind of the league coming in, and it was right. I mean, in those stories, you see that was what was pitched. And I think that was originally the name, and Nike had wanted him to be the Rhythm, and somebody pushed back and it became the Fire. So I don't know, somehow we found out Rhythm and we were doing these logos. Then the Fire came in and it was great. I was at their last home game in that 98 season, which they beat the LA Galaxy in a shootout in the Western Conference Final, the second game of the Western Conference Final, which was the best 2 of 3 series. They won the first 2 games, so they advanced to MLS Cup. It was the old school MLS shootout at Soldier Field. Atmosphere was great. I mean, it wasn't full. It wasn't 60,000, but I'd love to go back and look at the attendance. It felt big, and it felt big time. And Section 8, which is the name of the Chicago Fire supporters, they were way ahead of their time as far as supporting MLS. I distinctly remember leaving Soldier Field, walking down the lakefront. If anybody's ever been to Chicago, they know Soldier Field is on the lake, and walking along the lakefront to our car, which was probably parked under what was then known as Grant Park, a few blocks up the lake, and everybody just singing the Chicago Fire chants, everybody walking together. This is 1998. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what we expect now in MLS. Not necessarily in 1998. So, man, diehard fan, love Josh Wolf. I mean, those Chicago Fire teams were stacked. Ante Razov, Peter Novak, DeMarcus Beasley, Carlos Bocanegra at various times, Zach Thornton, Chris Armas, Jesse Marsh. I mean, I'm leaving out lots of guys, right? I mean, just stacked with talent, stacked with people who are still integral in soccer in this country. Bob Bradley, of course, the manager. My love for the Chicago Fire as a kid was really, really strong.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you and I, the reason why we're where we are now is because we are very realistic about our opportunities to become professional athletes and stars. We realized there had to be another path. You went to Carleton College. I went to Washington Lee, both Division III athletics programs. I literally had Wake Forest bumper stickers on my car ready to go. And at the last second, something dawned on me. If I go to an ACC school for 4 years, I might get in 3 broadcasts. And the internet and streaming was really not a thing. So you were either TV, radio, or it wasn't being broadcast. And I finally realized I need to go to a smaller school. They promised me I could do every single sport they had. So that's a couple hundred games. And by the end of 4 years, maybe I might be mediocre and have a chance.
It's the same story. I will say, I don't think I was as calculated as you just described you were. I didn't realize in high school the kind of the benefit of going to a big school that had a traditional broadcasting program. I just thought, you go to whatever school you are and you try to be the radio broadcaster for the team. I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, which is where Northwestern is. Diehard Northwestern fan. Northwestern would have been a perfect place for me in a lot of ways, but it was across the street from where I grew up, so I didn't really consider it. And in retrospect, it's a good thing, because had I gone and had I tried to do broadcasting, and you go to Medill, where it's like you're saying about Wake, so competitive, right? And maybe you're lucky to play the politics right, that senior year you're able to do a little bit. And I don't know that environment would have worked for me, but it wasn't, again, it wasn't a calculated decision like that back then. I wish I could say it was, but my experience at Carleton is exactly like you described it at Washington and Lee. I called hundreds of games of every sport. And maybe I'm not in class getting, taught specifically things, but I had a wonderful mentor, a guy named Eric Seeger, who was a sports information director there, who was a very good broadcaster in his own right. He helped me out a lot. And you just learn, right? A buddy of mine named Adam Rossa, who's actually in Austin right now as a sports reporter at Spectrum on television. He and I were the same year, and we were the only two in the whole school that wanted to do it. So for 4 years, we basically called every game together. He was actually an athlete. He played football and a little baseball, so I got to call some of his games, whereas I was not, so I could do everything. But I think for both of us, like, that really helped, because we could figure it out with each other. We could figure it out with Eric, and it's just reps, right? In this, I'm sure you'd agree, Lincoln, like in our world, the biggest, especially when you're raw and you haven't done it a lot, the biggest thing that's going to help you improve is just reps, just doing it a bunch of times. You can hear people talk about the best way to do it all day long, but doing it yourself, figuring out what works for you, listening back to your broadcast and saying, I didn't like that, I like that. That's the best way to do it. And going to a small school where you're the only person who wants to do it, you improve immensely, and you kind of figure things out on your own over those 4 years.
Yeah, you had Northwestern in your backyard. I grew up here in Austin, and for the University of Texas, I just knew I had to leave for 4 years because I loved Austin so much. I wanted to come back. So I knew I had to get out of the state briefly, but obviously they have a great program here as well. For viewers to put in perspective, again, when we were in college, the parents were the primary listeners, and a lot of them, before the streaming had caught on, were literally making long distance phone calls to listen in on a phone that we had set off the hook at the radio station to listen into the speakers. It has certainly come a long way.
I'll big up Carleton. We were I was 07 graduates. So I was there from 03 to 07, and we were doing over the internet the whole time. The reason was out of necessity, because KRLX, the student radio, first, Carleton is not a sports school. So KRLX, the student radio station, is well known as being a station where anybody at the school who wants to have a radio show can get one. So like every quarter or trimester, around trimesters, whoever wanted to get a radio show, they would submit their names. And then basically you'd have like seniority over what time slot you got. And the time slots would be constructed to make sure there was a time slot for everybody that wanted one. So if, hundreds of people wanted it, there'd be, hour-long shows 24/7, right? And if you're a freshman, you're getting the show at 3 a.m. on Tuesday night. And because of that, there's no room for sports, right? I mean, some people might want to do a sports sucker. There's no room for a sports broadcast, right? Because that's taking somebody's radio time slot of where they're going to play their super hipster indie rock that nobody's ever heard, right? So for us, it was all streaming, audio streaming on the Athletic website. And by the time I left, we were doing some video streaming as well. I don't know if, anybody can make out what was happening on the field, right? But we were trying it. So Carleton was by necessity a little ahead of the times, but it was parents. That was it. We get a gift basket at the end of the season, you know what I mean? From like the players' parents thanking us. There were probably 10 people listening, but it's fun.
Freshman year, I was given the classical music time slot. And so I just played soundtracks to my favorite movies.
There you go.
Because it had, some strings, some woodwinds. So while at Carleton, I believe you started an internship. Maybe you're a bug and clock operator back in a truck for your first taste of MLS.
Yeah. So interned with the league broadcasting department in between my sophomore and junior year, summer 2005. Back then it was a summer internship. Now those internships I think are full year. And through that, I got put on the game of the week as a job. The ESPN Soccer Saturday was known on ESPN2 back then, as the clock and score operator, running what we would call the bug in TV, which is just the scoreboard you see on your screen, right? That has a score, it has a time. There'll be some ads coming off it. There'll be some stats that drop down. I was there when I was 20 and 21, sitting in the truck, my junior and senior year in college. I'd fly out Friday afternoon to wherever the game was. I'd stay. The game would be Saturday. I'd come back Sunday. I'd do my homework on the plane. And I got to kind of learn a lot about TV. I got paid, which was amazing. And I got to go to all these MLS venues. I was hanging out with Rob Stone, Eric Winalda, and Brandy Chastain every weekend because they were the broadcasters on the game at the time. And, I grew up watching Brandy and Eric and Rob on TV, right? I mean, it was just this crazy experience for me. Traveling around as a young kid, learning about the business, and that I would say that experience turned me a little bit from like the diehard Chicago Fire supporter to really feeling invested emotionally, and honestly professionally as well into the entire league, the league as a whole, the growth of MLS and American soccer, but specifically the American League that would then become an American and Canadian League, and that kind of turned me to focus to the whole way. And I still do feel really strongly about MLS and where it's going and where it's come in that time. I mean, we're coming up on 18, 17, 16 years since I was there, and the league has just changed so much.
So you basically replaced John Strong in Portland. We've never heard from that guy again.
Yeah. He'll fill in. He'll fill in for me sometimes. Like, I got married and I missed a game, filled in. So I had to miss a game once last year at the last minute. He filled in, but yeah, he's just a fill in at this point on regional television. That's John Strong. From what I imagine he gets the call from you and you say, "Hey, I'm getting married." And he goes, "Chicken. I'll have the chicken." And you're like, "No, you're not invited to the wedding. I need you to fill in the booth." But you're on the radio for the first year or two. Yeah.
How did that opportunity come about?
Yeah. First, I'll say, for anybody, I'm being sarcastic. John is a very good friend of mine. He's been a great supporter of my career. I love John. We're very close. So that was just a little banter. Just want to make sure that's clear. So I was in Eugene, right, as a sports director, and this is a lesson I think for people out there, like always network, because I didn't do it well. And the person who's now the vice president of broadcasting of the Portland Timbers, who's a guy named Matt Smith, used to be a sports anchor at the Fox station up here in Portland. And we overlapped. My time in Eugene and the end of his time in Portland overlapped, 6 months. Again, it was the Ducks going to the national title game against Auburn. And so since we're in Eugene, all the Portland stations just call us for all the content. We send it up there. We do the work in Eugene, send it up to Portland, and they put it on TV in the big market. But I knew him a little bit, but I didn't, he got the job in 2011 to run broadcasting for the Timbers. And I didn't really reach out to him, and I didn't say, "Hey, I'm an MLS guy. I just want to let you know." For me at that point, I thought I'm in market 120. Portland is market 22 or whatever. I'm so far from that nobody wants to hear from me, and nobody cares about me. And so I thought, I didn't even think to do it. Then it's 2013 playoffs. Timbers had this amazing season, right? They won the West in the regular season, or the playoffs for the first time. And I get an email from Matt. He says, I'm sitting in the truck with Larry Tiscornia, who was the VP of broadcasting at MLS at the time. And Larry, and who I interned for in 2005. And Larry says, you're an MLS guy. I didn't know that. Let's meet. And so we met in that off season, and worked out that John was moving on to national television. And so they needed somebody to do radio because that spot was open, and worked out for me to do that. 2014, I did a year of just doing radio for the Timbers while still being the sports director at KEZI, the ABC station in Eugene. And then after 14, worked out a way. T2 was coming in. So there was kind of more things happening in the organization, worked out a way to get me up full time in Portland with the Timbers starting in 2015. And it came from there. But the lesson is it may have happened even sooner if I had just, sent Matt an email in 2011 and said, hey, just heads up, I'm down here. I love MLS. And in a way, I got lucky in a way with that. So that's the tale. As always, if there's something you want, it can't hurt to just send an email and try to make a connection.
All right, so we're going to dive into the Sockers. Some of the folks tuning in who aren't aspiring to be broadcasters, this is what they're hoping to hear about. Yeah. Portland came to Austin twice last year. I believe Austin went to Portland at some point. That's not as important, but that first match was national TV. But you were the only regional broadcast crew that came from outside the state of Texas to Q2 Stadium. Now, I imagine once the comfort with travel starts to improve a little bit over the next year or so, Austin will be a bit more of a destination. We've already seen some folks this year, including Cincinnati. But after you had seen Q2 on TV, what was that experience like for you all to call a match in person last year?
It's great. It's great. Obviously, everybody sees it on TV. It's incredible what Austin had in year one, and especially kind of deep into the year after, it took a while to get the first goal at home and the first win at home. The Timbers, helped you guys out with that. To see the support stay the same. Look, as I just said, my perspective goes back to 98 MLS and before that, watching it on TV in 96, but really in 05 and 06, traveling to all these different venues, whether it be Robertson Stadium in Houston or Spartan Stadium in San Jose, Rice Eccles in Utah, still Gillette in New England. They're still there. But these venues, the atmosphere was not great. The venues were not soccer specific. It was just very different. And to see now so many markets and new ones coming in that are 75,000 people in Charlotte, Austin, packing out, selling out every game with this incredible atmosphere. It's something that I wouldn't have imagined possible in 2005. Like the fact that 2006, I was doing that Robertson Stadium, Spartan Stadium, and then 2011, the Timbers come into the league, and I was there for the first game while working in Eugene to cover that game, and I was blown away. The whole stadium was sold out. The whole stadium was singing and standing the whole game and just raucous. And Austin has that, and so. It's wonderful that there's so many markets now in America where the MLS team has that environment. Austin's is at that top, right? In that top tier. And we still go to places. We're lucky. We travel. I appreciate the Timbers commitment to send our broadcast on the road because it makes a huge difference for us and makes a huge difference for the broadcast. And so, not every atmosphere in MLS is like that. More of them are, but not everyone is like that. And Austin's is great. So can't wait to go back in August. I think August 31st it is, I want to say. And it was a great trip last August.
Now back to a more normal schedule. We only get to do a couple of meetings each year, one home and home. Hey, what will you remember from last year's MLS Cup final run?
It's special to be able to be around a team and call games of a team that makes it to a championship game, in whatever way it is. And like, I even working for the Timbers and being the voice of the Timbers, I try not to be a super homer and I try not to come from that perspective. A lot of that I think is is built on my background as a broadcast journalist, right? Which I consider myself a broadcaster now, not really a journalist anymore because I'm working for a team, but being in local news for 7-8 years, especially covering a program like the University of Oregon, big program, big money, big spotlight around them. I considered myself a journalist in the sense of, we weren't the rah local news kind of people. We were covering everything objectively. And so I still try to take that perspective a little bit. That being said, when you're along for the ride, so to speak, when the team that you're covering or calling games for, whatever, make it to the championship game, it just makes your job more fun. So of course you root for that. I've been lucky to now do 3 MLS Cups. When I was in my previous job in Eugene, 2 college football national championship games. I started in Missoula, Montana, 2 FCS national championship games with the Grizz. And I certainly don't take it for granted being around a team that gets to the last game of the year. But each time it's special and it's really enjoyable. From a personal standpoint, from a broadcasting standpoint, Felipe Mora's goal was outrageous. I mean, the Timbers were not particularly good for the 90 minutes, I didn't think. Obviously, at the end, they got a lot better and they were good in the extra time and they found the way to get that goal. That stadium at that moment, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It's one of those all-time moments, no matter who you're rooting for, no matter who you're working for, to be in a stadium for a moment like that and see 25,000 plus people maybe 23,000 plus, because there were about 2,000 New York City fans that were sitting just to our right. They were pretty bummed at that moment, but to see just the pure elation and beers everywhere. It was a really, really, really special moment. And we were sitting in the stands, because Providence Park is not really built for an event like that. It's a 90-year-old building. And so we were basically an auxiliary press set up on a table in the stands. We had a great view of it, but we're also, we have beer getting thrown on us and people going everywhere. And it was a very, very cool moment to be able to call, regardless of what happened afterwards, regardless of them, not getting it done in penalties. That was a really cool event. And look, Providence Park deserved to host an MLS Cup. Austin deserves one day to host an MLS Cup. LAFC, Atlanta's already done it, but Seattle's already done it, right? But these great special environments in MLS, they deserve to have these marquee games with their teams there. The fan bases deserve it. And I'm glad that the Timber supporters were able to experience that last year.
So coming into this year, right now, you all have had a couple of tough opponents, a 2-2 draw with the Revs, and we saw almost able to come out full 3 points in national spotlight in LA against LAFC, but a red card puts y'all down, and in the end that catches up with you for another draw. But other than obviously Diego Valeri is the elephant no longer in the room, although he may come back as an ambassador down the road. But how is this team different than the team that Austin saw a year ago?
Yeah, not very, other than Sebastian Blanco is not fully fit right now. And the 2 starting center backs, Luis Mabiala, Dario Zuparic are both still out. They had off-season hernia surgery, both of them, like at the same time. They're kind of this, which actually is kind of quite nice. Like they're in sync. And so they haven't been playing. Felipe Mora is out. He had off-season knee surgery. So they're still not fully available, but they basically ran it back. Diego Valeri he'll have a statue. Well, I don't know if they're going to build a statue, but he's at that level, right? He's going to go into he's going to get his name in the rafters, so to speak, at Providence Park. He deserves everything that's coming for him. He transformed this club along with Diego Chara and deserves all of it. But by the end of last year, he wasn't a big part of the team on the field. He was coming on late as a sub, and he wasn't a big on-field reason why they made it to MLS Cup. So from that sense, there's not a lot different. The big change really is in goal with Steve Clark now in Houston, just down the road from you guys, and Aljaž Ivičić getting a chance now to be the starter. And I think he played pretty well against LAFC. Wasn't really tested against New England. 2 goals that I don't think he could do much on, and then otherwise didn't have to make really any difficult saves. He had to make some difficult saves against LAFC, and I thought for the most part stepped up well. Can't really fault him on the goal. So yeah, team's pretty similar. They're running it back. Why not? You made MLS Cup. They're deep. They're really deep. Even with 5 potential starters injured in Mora, Blanco, who's, coming off the bench, but not able to start, Eric Williamson, who's coming back from an ACL tear, Dario Zuparic, and Luis Mabiala, they're still putting out an extremely strong 11 that went toe to toe with last year's Supporters Shield winners, and an LAFC team that, look, in week 1 smashed Colorado and looked like they were back, right? So similar, very similar. I think Austin fans will see a very similar team than they saw on decision day. Austin got Portland at home in the worst part of Portland season last year in the summer and smashed them both games. But the decision day Timbers, I think, are a lot more similar to what you'll see this weekend.
You mentioned T2. For those who are less familiar with anything that's not MLS, obviously that's an opportunity for some of your players, some of your academy players to first become pros and get a taste of that level of competition. But it also means you use the word depth. That is not a luxury Austin had last year because, frankly, they didn't have a full-fledged academy where if you're playing a third match in 8 days, hey, maybe you can fill a couple of extra roster spots with young men who know the system. What do you think Austin can expect in the next few years when they join MLS Next Pro next year with their second side, when they start to see even more development from kind of guys right on that threshold of making their way up to MLS?
Yeah, look, the Timbers have T2 has helped the Timbers. T2 took last year off as a lot of the, kind of MLS 2 teams did, and they're back this year in MLS Next Pro. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that like the Timbers Academy has been producing, player after player that has helped the first team. There's been some here or there, but the guys who have come through T2 and use that well and then had success in MLS were not, brought up in the academy. And look, that you could talk forever about homegrown territory rules. Portland is a smaller market, possibly less talent rich, so to speak, than some other markets. Certainly you would think around Austin, and if they can pull from parts of Texas that Austin could develop a really good academy and have some success there. But what T2 did is, for a guy like Eric Williamson, it gave him a chance to develop and get games and grow. And there was a kind of a half a season where he was the best player in the USL Championship. I want to say it was 19. So 18 is his first year here, played a little with T2, went on this weird loan to Portugal that just didn't work out for a lot of reasons. Came back in the beginning of 19, first half of 19, playing for T2, just bossing the league, best player in the league. And then all of a sudden, the second half of the year, he's a sub for the Timbers first team. And then that offseason, he has a great offseason. 2020 comes around. Break for the pandemic. He keeps working, keeps grinding, and then MLS's back starts. He's the starter next to Diego Chara, and all of a sudden he's just blown onto the scene. And he's come from this prospect youth national team guy in the past, but is he going to reach the potential to? Oh yeah, okay. Now he's in the national team player pool, starting in a Gold Cup final, and he's off and running. So Eric, a guy who used that great. Marvin Loria, a guy who the Timbers signed initially to T2 from Saprissa in Costa Rica, that has been extremely important as sometimes starter, sometimes depth piece off the bench for the first team. A guy like Renzo Zambrano, who isn't on the Timbers anymore, but has put in minutes. So they've used it as a springboard, and they've used it well in many ways. But still, I think the Timbers bread and butter has been getting the signings right. Diego Chara, Diego Valeri were as big of hits as you could ever have in the history of MLS in signing players. Jimmy Chara, I think, has been really good. Dyron Espria has matured, and he's a great player now. Christian Paredes, they have depth now in that spot. They mostly get their signings right, to be honest. When you look through it, there's a lot more hits than misses. That's how they built their team throughout the years, and that's why they've maintained success really since 13. They've been a contender year in, year out, with the exception of a couple of years where they missed the playoffs on the last game of the year.
So as we get closer to wrapping things up here, again, talking to Jake Zivin, the voice of the Portland Timbers. When Austin goes back to Portland for the first time since the season finale, which was technically, again, decision day last year, there wasn't really much of a decision to be made. Portland was going to be moving on to the Western Conference playoffs and be among the teams of destiny to collide with New York City FC. But what's one thing you absolutely know fans can expect to see when these two teams get together, at least from the vantage point of watching Portland play?
No disrespect to Cincinnati and Miami. It's going to be a different opponent. It's going to be a different task for Austin. I think the schedule makers obviously did Austin a favor. First 2 games at home against 2 teams that missed the playoffs last year in the East that have their documented struggles. that's how to take away from Austin dropping 5 on both of them, because that's difficult no matter what. But it's not going to be as easy to put 5 on the Timbers at Providence Park.
Yeah.
I think you'll see a team that's organized, that's bought in, that everybody knows their role, they know what they're doing. Like I said, I mean, they're basically running it back. A very talented and dangerous attack. You might see a Jimmy Chara bicycle kick. He's done it 2 in a row, or overhead kicks 2 games in a row. So maybe we'll get a 3rd in a row. I don't know. But it'll be a very different game for Austin than the first 2 were, and that's good. I'm personally extremely excited to see Austin. I feel like I know what the Timbers are. Any thoughts of a demise, I think, 2 games into the season should be wiped away. I think the Timbers are the same level as they were last year. They'll be a contender in the West, as they have been for years past. Not to say they're going to get back to MLS Cup, not to say they're going to win the West, but I think they'll be contending for that at the end of the year. Austin, we'll see. And I think this game is that test, right? Is Austin for real in 2022? What do they do at Providence Park on Saturday? I think will go a long way to showing. And it doesn't mean they need to win. Doesn't mean they need to blow out the Timbers. Doesn't even mean they need to get a result. But if they're toe to toe with Portland, and this is a great game, and then I think, okay, Austin, yeah, they're legit. And look, we thought, we came away last year and we Austin at its best, obviously, all year long. But I was surprised that they didn't have more points than they did. I thought that team was better than the record, right? Just what the eye test. And I think we've certainly seen that in the first 2 games of the year, more like, maybe what we saw when we went down there, when the Timbers went down there a couple of times, then maybe the perception around the league was about Austin FC.
Yeah, you caught them right before that grind that started to take a toll on their personnel. Of course, guys by the name of Driussi and Gite and some others have since joined the fold. But yeah, for some reason, Austin really gets up for the teams that are top half of the table, and that is always where Portland tends to find itself. Whenever we call games away from Austin, we can always hear the Austin fans chant. The one time it's difficult is when they went to Portland at the end last year, because obviously Portland is full voice as well there with the Timbers Army. I look forward to folks tuning in and seeing all shades of green, regardless of who they're cheering for. You're going to have the live call for people out of market. Your call will be on ESPN Plus, but remind us where folks in the Portland area can find you all on local TV.
Yes, assume it'll be on ESPN Plus. I'm a big fan. I'll say this: I'm a big proponent of the home game, the home broadcast should always be the one on ESPN Plus. I wish there was the option of both. I think If you're an Austin fan living in Washington D.C., you should be able to hear the Austin FC broadcast. If you're a Timbers fan living in Chicago, you should be able to pick ours. But I know there's reasons beyond that for that. Maybe you don't want to hear ours. Maybe you're a Timbers fan and you want to hear the other team because you don't like us. I don't know. We're on Fox 12 Plus here in Portland, so it's KPDX, Fox 12, our longtime partners here, Fox 12 Oregon, and so over the air this year, every game over the air. Still with our Root Sports production team, which fantastic. I'll put our production team up against any in the league. And now airing over the air every game for free, so to speak. All you need is an antenna on Fox 12 Plus.
And of course, that means we've got our local TV crew as well. A young up and coming Adrian Healy, along with Michael Lahoud, will have the call on the CW Austin. And a reminder to folks in Austin, you can tune into a 30-minute early pregame show on the CW Austin as well. That's always a good time. Of course, Unimas Austin with Roger Valdivieso and Sadi Guadarrama. I'll have the call on radio on Alt 97.5 FM. But Jake, certainly enjoyed seeing you when you were our guest at Q2 Stadium. Look forward to, again, getting to go back and listen to your call after the fact, but excited for these 2 teams to collide here early in the season.
Thanks, Lincoln. Thanks for having me. Can't wait to be back in Austin in August. It is at the top of the MLS road trip rankings list. We have our serious rankings. We have tiers. Austin is in that top tier now, and we can't wait to be back in August.
That's great to hear. Hopefully there's a little something on the line when they collide for that second time. All right. It's Portland and Austin on Saturday. That's 7:00 Pacific time. So you're staying well caffeinated here in the Central Time Zone because it'll be a 9:00 kick here locally. Jake, appreciate your time.